James Fallows is a well-known and highly regarded journalist who just penned a piece for The Atlantic titled "The Media Has Learned Nothing from 2016," essentially saying the media has failed to treat President Trump differently from other presidents. Well, I respectfully disagree. In his Atlantic piece, James Fallows writes about the failure of much of the press to respond to the realities of the Trump age. He claims the media is applying anachronistic standards of fairness and balance that Trump sees as a weakness he can exploit. Tell that to CNN's Jim Acosta.
What do you say to your critics that you're concocting a national emergency here in order to get your wall?
Or how about Axios' Jonathan Swan?
You know, there are those that say you can test too much. You do know that.
Who says that?
Oh, just read the manuals, read the books.
Manuals?
Read the books.
Manuals?
And very early on, one-time CBS Evening News anchor Scott Pelley put his job on the line by calling out the president.
It has been a busy day for presidential statements divorced from reality.
In fact, since the Trump era, dozens of editors and reporters have shifted editorial practices. The Washington Post keeps a daily log of the president's lies, now topping 20,000. Fact-checking has become the norm. And papers like the New York Times allow its top political reporters, Maggie Haberman by example, to do commentary.
His re-election prospects are in trouble.
But Fallows says the news media would be better off not reporting what this president says, contends, or does, unless there are external indications that it's true. But James, if that's what the president is saying, isn't that part of the story, true or false? But to give Fallows his due, he's not wrong about everything.
We need to ban gas-powered leaf blowers.
Now that gets my batteries charged. I have to say, I love James Fallows, and he is right about those confounded gas-powered leaf blowers. But I thought this piece missed the mark, Lila. I think some news organizations, to their credit, have done things that they're uncomfortable with. I mean, heaven's sakes, the Washington Post changed its masthead to say democracy dies in darkness, and that had to do with President Trump directly.
I think that there are some pretty significant differences between how things are being covered now versus how they're being covered in 2016. But one thing that I didn't see in the piece is there was no acknowledgement of the fact that Biden is the candidate, but Trump is both the candidate and the president. And because he's the president, you can't simply ignore everything he says. It still needs to be taken down for the record. It still needs to be analyzed. That said, I think there are some outlets that do sometimes stray in the name of trying to appear unbiased, end up resorting to false equivalency, end up doing a bit of stenography maybe instead of reporting, where they just write down exactly what was said without context or without enough context. But overall, the big differences I see is the fact-checking in real time, the willingness to push back. Those are things that we maybe didn't see as much of 4 years ago because everyone was so gobsmacked by the differences.
Yeah, true.
Yeah, I have great admiration for Jim Fallows. However, even Babe Ruth struck out once in a while, and this is one of those times. Maybe the fumes from the gas-powered leaf blowers. Look, it took a little bit of time at the beginning. Remember back many, many years ago when this whole nightmare began, we used to debate whether or not we should call the president's lies lies.
Yeah.
Well, that seems to have been pretty widely resolved. And I don't doubt, as Lila points out, there are some media outlets that either don't quite get it or just don't feel comfortable breaking out of the old mold. But the notion that we should not report what he says, good Lord, the story of this presidency, politically and substantively, is what spews from his mouth and from his fingers onto his iPad. That has been the documentation of every important moment of this presidency. You're not getting it from reading policy briefs or talking to aides. You're getting it from documenting what he says and how he says it. So the idea that we should ignore that just doesn't compute with me.
So I agree with you all somewhat. What I would say, and I've been saying this for a while, is you do not have to report on everything he says. I think you have to archive it. I think you have to, put it someplace where It can be accessed easily by anybody who wants. We have all kinds of web space now to do that. But every single moment of every single day, what he says, no. I have never thought that from the beginning. He knows we're going to do that, so he exploits that, and that's not true. Let's take this out of the tweeting universe for a moment and think about George Bush as president, or for that matter, Barack Obama. They weren't tweeting all the time. What if we reported on every single thing they said every day? We did not. There's no reason to do the same thing with President Trump. Let's have some discernment. Let's figure it out. And then you can always go get it. You don't dismiss it because it's very important because he said it, but you don't have to every moment say it. The other thing is, and I've been saying this from the beginning, every time he calls a press conference, and still to this day, there will be news outlets that will cover it from stem to stern. Why? You do not have to, unless we're on the brink of war or there is some massive announcement he has to make. I think some discernment is important at this point. And by now, should we not know? It's 4 years later. So to that extent, I'm with James Fallows. Take a beat. Think about how you're doing this.
When I read this piece, I came away thinking that the headline was wrong because to me, it read like the New York Times has learned nothing from 2016. That was what he kept coming back to. And there, I actually think he has a point. Dean Baquet, the editor of the Times, gave an interview a little while ago that I don't think has gotten enough attention, in which he actually said the words, "We all have to get used to this president." And to me, what that suggests is if the president says something deeply abnormal, for example, that the only way he can lose is in a fraudulent election, that rather than pointing out how aberrant that is, you treat it as if a new norm has been established. And in that regard, this is not, by the way, Times-wide. My favorite political reporter this cycle is Stead Herndon, who works for the Times. That's not his MO. But institutionally, I do think the Times has a real problem because they're trying to float above it and look like they don't have a stake in everything that's happening right now. And it's not the case, and I think it leads to some intellectual dishonesty.
Yeah. On that point, though, 4 years ago, the New York Times wasn't letting some of its political reporters do opinion and, commentary, and they've broken down walls that they hadn't before.
Doing opinion and commentary is one thing. I'm not sure that saying we all got to get used to the way this president operates is a good philosophy.
Yeah.